So there in the home of a pantheist was the statement of an atheist really applauding the theist. Now, it is doubtful that it would succeed, except that he was appealing to the conscience of a Christianized people. If we don't settle where we are going to get our moral reasoning from, sooner or later the law of the jungle will prevail, and I think we will begin to see the havoc that none of us wishes to see.
That microphone right over there.
I just wanted to open by saying thank you so much for coming and speaking with everyone here. It was really inspiring to hear all the stories and all your points, and you really did inspire a lot of people, so thank you for that. Going to my question, though, my question is derived from 2 points that both of you pushed throughout both of your speeches. Those points being that we are intrinsic and that only God can provide this, and that the idea that we are just made of atoms or meant to just populate the earth is kind of silly, that being like a secular humanist kind of view. So my primary question is, why can't we have both of these perspectives be correct at the same time? Because they don't seem mutually exclusive to me. For example, if you take an outlook from nature, from just in general, we may look like a pollutant. You know, you go to the rainforest where humans are cutting down the trees and killing animals and destroying things, and we just look like a pollutant on the earth. Or maybe even from some greater being looking down, we could look like simply a pollutant or a bacteria infecting our planet. However, if we look at each other from our family or our friends' perspectives, or even from ourselves, we can find this intrinsic value in one another, the way we spread our love to one another, and that's a very important value. You know, I don't think either of these perspectives necessarily devalue the other. You know, it just depends from where you look. So my question is, why can't we have both? And a little further from that, I was wondering why you tended to kind of put down a secular kind of point of view throughout the talk. It seems like I don't know, it didn't seem completely necessary to put that down because yeah. But anyway, going off the main question, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's a great question. Again, you can just see how much the question of purpose, value, meaning, morality, and all sort of come into play in all of these questions. Let me take the second one first because it's actually simpler to deal with, and then move to the first one. Secularism or secularization, if you go back to the 70s and 80s, Peter Berger from Boston was sort of a seminal thinker in this area. I've had the privilege of talking to him, had the privilege of even interviewing him. Writing in the 80s, he himself saw sort of the end of Christendom coming, the end of the Christian worldview. He sat in our radio studio and said these very words. He said, I was wrong. I was wrong. I had not at all thought of what evangelicalism was going to accomplish in the lives of millions of people all over the world. But he defined secularization in these ways, where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. Where religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. Now, I think we have to be careful here. It is a good thing to have a secularized leadership and government oversight, because you cannot force religion on anybody in a pluralistic society. But if secularism means that there is no vertical possibility for life, if it means that you cannot allow the freedom for people to believe and trust in a divine creator, then it is not just secularization, it is a hostile imposition of a this worldliness. It will never work. Even if the Christians were to just lay down and give up the fight on this, there are other worldviews that simply will not tolerate a totally secularized consciousness. A person in one of these worldviews said to me when I was traveling, he said, let me tell you something, how I see my faith versus the Westerner's faith. And he drew 2 circles, and it told me everything I needed to know. In that circle, that big circle, he put a dot. In the other circle, he also put a dot. He said, the left circle is the Westerner's faith, the right circle is my faith. When I look at that big circle and a dot, he said, for the Westerner, the dot is their faith, the circle is their life. And they're willing to give up the dot to keep the circle. He said, when you come to me, the dot is my life, the circle is my faith. He said, it encompasses everything that I do, and nobody will ever be able to knock it out of me. So if you were to ask the same question in some countries of the world, you'd be very fortunate if you didn't get silenced in some way. Because we live in a pluralistic society where we give the privilege in a secularized consciousness that there may be a transcendent worldview and a vertical worldview. So I just say to you, seculum from the Latin means this worldly. And if we interpret everything from a this worldly perspective and do not give the possibility of the vertical, we will end up with exactly where we have ended up. Right and left, no up and down. Nietzsche, the atheist, said, is there any up or down left? What sacred games will we need to invent? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the horizon? Are we not perpetually falling? Will not lanterns have to be lit in the morning hours? That was an atheist saying. How are we going to light our way into the future? So secularism, and I think it is Anthony Kronman, who from Yale has written this book right now on how secularism was failed by the university. The university didn't do justice to it. I've responded to him in my book, Jesus Among Secular Gods. Several pages. Why it failed was because it really did not have the coherence, not because it wasn't taught. And that's why Anthony Flew, the philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, all of them ended up in the latter part of their lives saying, this naturalistic framework has been incoherent for us. Now, in terms of the difference between a quantity versus an entity, there's a world of a difference. There's a world of a difference. We are not just quantities. We are not just quantities that have come into being by some kind of atomic coming together. We are given the credit of a will, and you use the word love in your question, which can legitimately be used in a quantified universe. It is a metaphysical proposition, and dare I suggest to you, a spiritual proposition. And C.S. Lewis, in his book on four loves, talks about the four loves we experience: agape love, phileo, which is brotherly love, storge, which is protective love, and eros, which is romantic love. And he clearly points out that the latter three will have no base on which to stand if you do not have love itself defined from a vertical perspective. So the very question of love becomes ultimately undefinable in a secular horizontal axis. So my suggestion to you is a great question, and when you answer that from the Judeo-Christian worldview, the answers are very coherent. Answer it from the secular worldview, it fails to even justify the question. Thank you.
Hi, I want to thank you too for coming here. My question is something Ravi said, was that there's no other worldview that gives humans intrinsic being. So what I've been trying to make of is, why are there communities that are so much better at respecting and loving each other than the Christian church is?
Let me just come from an outsider's perspective. You know, wasn't growing up in the church. And so there's a level to which I kind of see things from an outsider perspective. It's been 16 years, but still, the fact of the matter is I still see some outsider stuff that happens. Let me suggest this to you, if I could, with all candor and all honesty towards other systems as well. Two things. The first thing is this. I've seen other places, whether places of worship or communities of worship or non-worship. Everybody acts the same way. This is not a thing that's only the church. The reason why the question actually pertains is because the church is called to a higher standard based on the one it follows, who treated everybody, even dissidents and even those within the ranks who were always failing, with dignity and respect. And so we see that oftentimes, yes, disagreements happen, but the church's example is Jesus himself, and of course his apostles, who sometimes saw the disagreements that were happening, but they treated it with discourse and trying to bring people back into, with a beautiful speech, with some kind of a way to convince people of what was true and beautiful and lovely. That's why the Apostle Paul says, whatever is lovely, beautiful, honorable, all these things, honest and true, think on these things. Don't think of the other person in a way that is less, because love hopes all things, believes all things, is patient, is kind, and all these things. That's the embodiment of the Christian ideal, because we follow the one who is the embodiment of love, who is Christ, who does all those things for us. That's why I think the contrast seems to be the way it is. The church seems to look a little bit worse than the rest of the world. And in some places, that's true. We do that. One of the things that happens oftentimes, and this is a reality, one of our colleagues, Sam Albury, who's dealt with some very, very serious issues in his own life, has seen the way the church has reacted. Other colleague friends of ours who've had sexual struggles, who have had other struggles in their lives, not just our colleagues who have come from a different background, but all over the world we see it. Sometimes they don't tell the people in the church because they're worried that's where they'll get hit the most. And that's just the reality, I think, of how people can get judgmental and self-righteous. But I'll tell you this, coming from an outsider's perspective, I've seen the other side of it, and I've seen that it's not so different after all. Because here's a truism that the church teaches. People are sinful. And we'll all act that way. All of us will. And that goes my second point, is that this is not a strike against the Christian church, or it might be a strike against the way that Christendom is expressed, yes, but it's not a strike against the gospel itself, because Christians behaving badly doesn't prove Jesus wrong. It actually proves him right, because he said people act that way. Human sin is a doctrine of the Christian faith, which I think it was Muggeridge who said that it is once the most resisted idea in all of Christendom, but it's also the one with most empirical evidence for it. And I think it was Philip Yancey who said, the fact that the Christian church behaves badly is actually proof that it's right about human sinfulness. But we have that hope that comes from without. So we have that standard we have to live by. And it is a shame. It's not an excuse to do bad things. It's simply, in fact, we have to be convicted more of the things that we do that are poor, because there are those who are looking from the outside and saying, why would I join that? Why would I do that? And this goes back to something about Jesus that I absolutely love. This is something that I just think is so important for us to understand here. Jesus made a comment, and it's a controversial comment, especially for his day. He says, for out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, and slander. These are what defile a person. He makes that statement about you and me. What he's pointing about in my heart and in your heart is that you're evil. That's a terrible recruiting poster. You're evil, come follow me. What's interesting, it's hard to get followers, but he did. Somehow he did. What I love about this statement is this. Jesus doesn't tell you what you want to hear. He tells you what you need to hear. And every other worldview, whether it's religious or non-religious, basically tells you that you can be the solution to your own problem, failing to recognize that because you're the problem, you can't solve you. Is that if we do enough good things, we'll please God, or if we do enough meditation, we'll become God, or if we educate ourselves enough, we'll have a Star Trek-like existence in a utopian society. See the faith in us? And the Christian message that Jesus says is that, no, that's not how it actually works. And he tells you like it is, not how you'd like it to be. The church needs to act like it has been redeemed. That's my answer to you. Thank you so much.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for coming. It's an honor. I just have a brief preface for you. In my history class, we are going over what is a human. From a scientific perspective, we are trying to construct a threshold for what atomically makes a human. From an intellectual level, would you say morality, thinking, and the ability to believe are what makes a human? Or do other words such as faith, devotion, and emotion need to be considered also or instead?
The very Latin word from which we get individual is that we cannot be divided up, cannot be carved up. We are indivisible. And so we are really a composite. We can't say we're just emotion or just intellect or just will or just psychological disposition. God views us as whole beings. That's why we are not quantities. You see, a half a slice of bread and half a slice of bread may make one slice of bread, but half a baby and half a baby don't make one baby. Solomon proved that at the city gate right from the beginning. You cannot carve up a person. And if you only view this from history, you will end up viewing man phenomenologically by the phenomenon that we call humanity. And if you view us phenomenologically, you will run into a wall because the phenomena are actually different in different cultures. They are so different not only in different cultures, but even in different households. You watch the way, if I'd grown up observing just my father and my mother for the first 20 years of my life, I would have just thought men are cruel, bullies, insulting, bad-tempered, and all of that, and women show how they are iconic in their love and mercy and kindness. That's in that microcosm, I would have come to extreme solutions. But then I watched as years went by, and watched how we all have that bent towards our choices. And when my father died, he was only in his 60s. My mother died when she was in her 50s. And I remember my dad standing by my mother's coffin, really, weeping and begging for forgiveness for the way he had treated her in all those years. And I had to put my arm around my dad at that time. But about before my dad passed on, I saw a change in his life that was so dramatic, so incredible. And I dare suggest to you it happened when he met Christ in his own life. He died at the age of 67 and asked me if I was living in Niagara Falls, Ontario at that time. He was in Toronto. Asked me to drive to pick him up. He had to go to the hospital. Why do we Easterners use anecdotes? We use anecdotes because we see so much we can infer from the anecdotal experience. So rather than calling my brothers and sisters, he called me. And he said, I want you to take me. I said, Dad, I'm 75 miles away. My older brother is 10 minutes away. I'll come. But why don't you have him take you? He said, no, I want you. So I got on to that Queenie and drove for 90 minutes. I picked him up. I wasn't prepared for what I was going to hear. And he told me of all of the years of anger, bullying, and the nastiness that he showed towards me, and begged for forgiveness as he was he never came back after that surgery. That was my last conversation with my father. If I took that microcosm of my household, what conclusions would I have drawn if I'd drawn it at age 17, at age 20, at age 30? And so when you take the paradigm and move it across humanity, you can't just go with phenomena. You have to go with essence. And it is essence that defines existence, not the other way around. The entire existential experiment was that existence precedes essence. And both Sartre and Camus, in effect, said it couldn't actually be. When Sartre was railing against the Vietnam War, he realized he was invoking a moral law that he himself had said was only existentially chosen. So I say to you that when you're studying humanity, you have to take all of the disciplines into play. And I put it this way. Number one, you search for truth. Number two, correspondence and coherence theories of truth. Number three, logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance. Number four, the four questions of life: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Truth, correspondence, coherence, logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance, the four questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Now you go to the five disciplines of God, knowledge, reality, anthropology, and ethics. You put the five disciplines together, that's what you must bring to bear to determine what it means to be human, not just carve the human being up into one faculty. God, knowledge, reality, epistemology, ethics. That's why you come to universities. It is to find unity in diversity. You can't take a single subject to explain all there is of humanity. And I think the Christian worldview brings those five disciplines together. And that's a bit of a heavy dose at night, but have a good sleep. It's a small world after all. God bless.
You've been watching Let My People Think with Dr. Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support. If you'd like to know more about this ministry or would like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766 or visit us online at www.rzim.org. You can also stay connected to RZIM through Twitter and Facebook. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 1820, Roswell, Georgia 30077.
The paradox of the stone is set forth as if it's a philosophical argument that basically, I think, just misunderstands the nature of the terms. If God is the greatest power of all, the highest of which nothing else greater can exist, then by definition, he is that. So there can be no stone big enough that he couldn't lift, because that would be a contradiction. So it's to set up really a false contradiction.
The paradox of the stone is actually a very old argument against God's existence. It comes from the medieval period when they were trying to understand, what does omnipotence mean? Richard Swinburne, for example, a contemporary Christian philosopher, has defined omnipotence as God being able to do all things that are congruent with God's character, with God's nature. So God can't do something illogical. God can't do something that doesn't cohere with God's nature. That's what omnipotence means. So that argument is really not an argument at all, because it's really about understanding how omnipotence is defined.
It's supposed to show that there are contradictions in the attributes of God, that it doesn't really make sense to believe in a being who is all-powerful. But that's a misunderstanding of what omnipotence means, or even how logic works. It's like asking, can we have what happens if you have an irresistible force and an immovable object when the two come together? Well, if you have one, you can have the other. So that's never going to happen. It's a logical contradiction. But that's not a limitation on God. It's just how logic works.
It's a philosophical game that does not respond to the actual data of what the Bible says about God himself as being above and beyond anything that exists or ever has existed. In fact, the source of all existing things.
The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And this has provided a remarkable opportunity for the gospel of Jesus Christ. RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind, and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy, and the New Zacharias Institute, we want to be able to take the questions that often serve as barriers to belief and instead use these as opportunities to share the gospel. By clearing those barriers, we can equip people to then engage with their friends, family, colleagues, and institutions. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of